First of all, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted internationally everyone to chant together. Then Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he predicted that all the Westerners would come, they would chant Jai Sachinandan together. And the dream was carried on through the Sampradaya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, for the first time, actually sent his disciples first to London, because London was the capital of the empire of that time. He sent them, but not much was accomplished at that time. Now that Prabhupada sent his disciples, his Grihastha disciples, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had sent sannyasis. These Grihastha disciples, they made an imprint. They made a great influence. The Hare Krishna Mahamantra was now being spread all over the continent, Europe, all the way to Japan. This Hare Krishna Mahamantra on records was being broadcast. So the temple president Gurudas, Mukunda, Shyam Sundar, they worked with their wives as a team, and they set up many 3 months worth of programs for Prabhupada, because I knew that so long as Prabhupada had preaching programs, he would stay in a place. So 3 months in advance. So Prabhupada came on September 11th, 1969. Here they are at the airport. So after Prabhupada had his VIP lounge reception with the reporters and so many questions asked, then the newspapers broadcast. Later that morning, some of the devotees brought Prabhupada several news articles about his London arrival. The Delhi sketch with its headline, "Enter His Divine Grace Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta Swami," carried a foot-high photo of Prabhupada playing kartals. The Sun story, "Happiness is Hare Krishna," appeared with a photo of Prabhupada and the devotees. And the Daily Mirror showed Saraswati and one of the adult devotees. So here we have Prabhupada right in the airport. You can see the Pan Am sign behind there. And standing is Malati. There's Purushottam, Prabhupada's servant. In front of Malati is little Saraswati. She's about 3 years old there, 2-3 years old. Dhananjaya is sitting down. The Delhi Telegraph, however, carried a different kind of article. Hindu temple protests. Conversion of office premises in Bloomsbury into a Hindu temple is being investigated by the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works, the article began. The devotees' neighbors at Berry Place had apparently complained about the renovation that had been going on for the past 2 weeks. The article quoted a Camden Council member. If their planning application is not granted, it will cost them a lot of money. So the building that just by chance in the bank, we had heard about it last week, the week before, they met a real estate agent who they had known in San Francisco. That real estate agent had a 5-story building in a very prominent place near Oxford Square, near all of the museums and the tourist areas. So that 5-story building, the devotees took up. And what Shyam Sundar did was, you remember Shyam Sundar had carved the Jagannath deities, and they had also made the Rath Yatra. He ordered from California redwood and cedarwood beams. So you see here, those beams, none of that was there. It was just an ordinary office building. Actually, it was a building that was used for Bible distribution. And according to zoning, only 2 people were allowed to live in the building. And they were planning for 30 devotees to live there. It was against zoning, all zoning rules. But by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, Sri Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, and the help of people like, there was one MP, we'll hear about him, and George Harrison, who signed all of the papers for them, they were able to get the zoning changed so they could have the temple there. But the newspapers picked up on it immediately because they had to make big news. So this is the final product here. The beautiful deities of Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, who were also carved. And then below, we'll read about the wonderful, mysterious way that Radha Landanishwara appeared. And here we have Prabhupada. It's a very narrow building. Downstairs in the basement was a kitchen, which they enlarged, and they made a prasadam room just big enough for the devotees who resided there. On the ground floor, they had the temple where you entered, and that was where they would also have the Sunday feast for the guests. The next floor was going to be Prabhupada's quarters. Above that was going to be the Brahmacharini quarters. Above that was going to be the Brahmachari quarters, and in the attic was going to be where the storage would be. Prabhupada said the devotees should do everything they could to prevent delays or obstacles to their establishing the temple and installing deities of Radha and Krishna. He suggested they go daily into the city, work carefully and persistently with the officials, and secure the authorization. Meanwhile, Shyam Sundar should continue his remodeling work at Berry Place. So Shyam Sundar, all the devotees, there were 18 devotees at that time, they all moved to Tittenhurst. That was John Lennon's estate. And two devotees, because that's all that was allowed, Shyam Sundar and a devotee named Tirthapad, they stayed at Berry Place doing all the construction. And practically every day, Mukunda and Gurudas had to go into the city and they had to do all of the legal work to get the zoning. They had to make a charity with the charity commission. They had to make a charity society. They had a lot of work to do. And they were all foreigners on top of it. They had all come from America. For Prabhupada, such diplomatic and legal strategy was as spiritual as translating Krishna or singing before his deities. He was serious, heavy, and his disciples sensed this as he looked at them with full concentration, his intelligent gaze penetrating to see if they understood his instructions, his directions. This heaviness of the Guru was an essential part of their relationship with him. They were young men, inexperienced, and he was sending them on a mature assignment that required both transcendental and worldly expertise. So Srila Prabhupada had done the same thing in India. He had set up the League of Devotees, he had it registered in UP, he set up the first temple in Jhansi, and then he made a center in Bombay, he set up the first Gaudiya Math there. In Allahabad, he was preaching. All over UP, he was preaching. In Lucknow, he would preach at the governor's palace. That was Prabhupada's mailing address, the governor's palace in Lucknow. So Prabhupada was quite astute. Not only was he a saintly sadhu who was translating the Shastras and chanting Hare Krishna, but he knew how to do these business affairs very expertly, and he was training his devotees like that. So I'm quoting, I've taken a few quotations from Guru Das's book by his example, because he was appointed the temple president, and he had an overview of what was going on everywhere. He would be with Prabhupada every day. This is from his book, By His Example. Prabhupada lived with his assistant Purushottam in one of the cottages, which had a small kitchen and sleeping area downstairs, and a room for Prabhupada's office and darshan upstairs. It was simple and sparse, but Prabhupada was happy. He could continue writing and chanting and be near his beloved disciples. He walked the grounds of the estate and talked to me of nature being the highest reflection of Krishna, and how by studying nature one could feel closer to Lord Krishna. So this was a personal revelation given to Guru Das by Prabhupada, because every morning since Prabhupada had had his stroke at 26 Second Avenue, and the old doctor who was brought, he said the old man prays too much. He has to get out and walk. So since that time, Prabhupada would be taking his morning walk, and he had a lot of beautiful 38 acres to walk at this Tittenhurst estate. He led the services both mornings and evenings, lecturing publicly in the Gallery Temple. So aside from the main mansion where John Lennon and Yoko Ono lived, there was a beautiful, with marble columns, just as if it were a temple, that had been built by the original owners for playing chamber music. That's like opera type music. And that was where they made their temple, where the devotees would have their programs morning and evening, and Prabhupada would give his lectures. I wish to thank, this is Gurudas speaking, I wish to thank John Lennon and Yoko Ono for the great kindness they bestowed, letting us stay there while we built the very place Radha Krishna Temple. A little bit more from, this is when they were building, you see so much, imagine bringing all the wood from California by boat and then rebuilding the entire temple. While most of the devotees were renovating John and Yoko's estate, doing righteous work, chanting, and residing in the refreshing English countryside, Shamasundar and Tirthapad were busy converting the Berry Place building into a dazzling Vaishnav temple right in the heart of London. Our new temple was completely unique, as the workers shaped the room from ceiling to floor with massive redwood and cedar planks imported from California. Modeled after a famous Buddhist shrine in India, the room resembled a ship's hull turned upside down. So you can see here, although it was just a square building like this one, they made this beautiful shape of the temple inside. Now we go on with the Lilamrita. Serving as Srila Prabhupada's menial messengers and workers, his disciples imbibed his gravity, and they too became heavy. They too became dedicated servants of their Guru. To bungle an important order because of naivety or carelessness would be a spiritual disqualification. Prabhupada had often told them a Vaishnava is not a retired person who only sleeps and eats and chants Hare Krishna. Rather, a Vaishnava fights for Krishna, as did Arjun and Hanuman. So here we have the temple when it was completed, but at this time, because the devotees had nowhere to stay, George Harrison knew that John Lennon needed work on his estate. Because the previous owners, they had 18 gardeners taking care of all of the land. John didn't have anyone. So George recommended to John, why don't you have the devotees come and live at the estate in the servants' quarters and do all of the menial work that you need? So it was good for the devotees and it was good for John Lennon also. And Prabhupada, he had his own little quarters there as well. Dawn arrived and time for Prabhupada's morning walk. The cold September night shrouded the morning heavy fog. Some of the low-lying grounds were waterlogged this time of year, and even in the higher plots, the long grass would remain wet until mid-morning. This climate, Prabhupada admitted, is not at all suitable for me, but having heard of the beauty of the grounds, he insisted on taking his usual morning walk. So when John Lennon moved in, and he didn't have gardeners, he let all of the grass grow. Some of it was 6 feet high. And the fog would make all of that wet. So Prabhupada would have to walk through that. in the morning. This is a layout of the, there were ponds, there were beautiful fountains, there were houses everywhere, there were stables, there was the gallery, and the big main mansion where John and Yoko Ono lived. Tittenhurst dated back to the 1770s, when the estate had been renowned for its many varieties of trees and shrubs. One of the most unusual collections in England. Even now, cypresses, weeping beech, Austin poplars, royal palms, redwoods, varieties of pines, monkey puzzle trees, and orchards of cherry and apple grace the stately grounds. One cypress stood more than 125 feet high. I have to make this a little smaller so that we can. Where did he go? थोड़ा छोटा करा दो क्योंकि एक लाइन नहीं आ रही. हाँ, थोड़ा और बड़ा. ये करो. नहीं, छोटा. All right. More than 125 feet tall. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. Okay. And the redwoods grew even taller. Bushes and vines grew in dense thickets. Now what do I do? Where's page down? Okay. Close by the main house were hundreds of rhododendrons. Rhododendrons, they also grow in the lowlands of the Himalayas here. Beautiful shrubs with all different colored flowers on them. A formal rose garden and several fountains. The estate had its own lake stocked with goldfish and perch, and at the far end of the property stood a row of greenhouses for grapes and peaches. Designed so as to be abloom in every season, the grounds had been carefully kept for generations. A recent owner having employed more than 20 gardeners, John, however, was deliberately allowing the grass to go uncut. Prabhupada walked out into the morning mist, onto the long wet grass. Dressed almost entirely in black, he wore a Russian hat with earmuffs and black rubber Wellington boots. A black full-length overcoat given him by the devotees in Germany covered his robes and sweater, leaving only glimpses of saffron cloth. It was quite cold. Here you can see Prabhupada's boots. Prabhupada was, imagine 38 acres to explore and so many beautiful places with roads and fountains and greenhouses. As Prabhupada walked, accompanied by several of his disciples, he passed a fountain near the main house and entered a grove. The path narrowed with vines and bushes close in and led them into an open meadow, once a well-tended lawn, but now a field of high grass. Bulldozers had excavated an area which would, according to rumor, would soon be a helicopter landing field. So amidst all of this high grass, they brought in a bulldozer, and they had this big circular area made so that John Lennon, instead of coming by car, he would be able to come in by helicopter. At the bottom of the sloping meadow, Prabhupada entered an orchard. Many leaves had fallen from the trees, and the sun's first rays now revealed shavings of autumn gold at Prabhupada's feet. He stood under one of the trees, and the diffused sunlight made the sky beyond the branches glow golden. So in India, we have 6 seasons. And we have, after the rainy season, we have the autumn and the fall. So here, everything remains green all year round. But in the northern hemisphere, when it gets cold, the trees lose their leaves and they go into a type of hibernation during the winter time because it's so cold. And when they lose their leaves, the leaves first turn golden and orange and red. It's very, very beautiful because the greenery, suddenly you can see everything turning golden and red and orange. And then the leaves fall and all of the ground also becomes golden that way. So Prabhupada was experiencing that now because it was September, it was autumn time. Okay. So whenever Prabhupada would take his morning walks, the few devotees who accompanied him, they would get to hear very personal things that Prabhupada would speak about. In my childhood, he said, there were so many names given to me. My maternal uncle called me Nandu because I appeared the day after Krishna appeared. And there was a great celebration on that day. That was Nandotsava. So his mama called him Nandu. I was called Nandu because I was born the day after Krishna. And I was also called Govardhan. One of my sisters used to call me Kacha. I'd been called so many names. As children, we were all very beautiful. There are always so many names given to them. But all of these names, they are all dead and gone. He turned and began to walk again, saying nothing more on the subject. So we can remember all the way back to the first volume, when Prabhupada was alone. He wrote a beautiful poem called Vrindavan Bhajan. So there he was reminiscing that all that's left now is a list of names. Where are my beloved mother and father and all of my relatives? They're all gone, only a list of names. So Prabhupada in that way was reminiscing about his beautiful childhood, all of his names, and now everything is dead and gone, just a list of names. Prabhupada mentioned the British economy, which he said was sinking into the sea because of the pound's devaluation. So many British lords had gained their wealth by exploiting other nations. Now, having exhausted their good karma, they were suffering the results of their sins. They were too poor to maintain their great estates. They used to have 17 men working full-time just on the garden, Prabhupada exclaimed, and now they cannot even pay the taxes. So they have to give the whole thing up, and it is falling into the hands of the Sudras. So here you have the prime example of this beautiful estate that was so carefully designed, and plants were brought from all over the world because he was a horticulturist, this Mr. Tittenhurst. And now it was sold to a singer, John Lennon, who came from a very ordinary background. We won't say Sudra, but we know that the artisans, the musicians, the dancers, they're considered as Sudras, although they performed great service to Srila Prabhupada. So of course, Prabhupada had to live through the colonization of India, Burma, all over that the British had taken over in Southeast Asia, and how they had exploited their colonies. And even in the time of greatest distress, the famines were created by the British because they took all of the rice and took it to England. And during the war, when millions of people were starving, they would not give the rice to the people. They would insist on taking everything and taking it out of India. So Prabhupada saw all of that. Although he explained that his family didn't suffer, they always had enough to eat. But he saw in Calcutta how hundreds and thousands of people were dying of starvation because of this exploitation and colonization. Ishan asked Prabhupada, how is it that a person like me, from such a degraded background, can come to Krishna consciousness? Because you are intelligent, Prabhupada replied. I don't understand. Because you are intelligent, Prabhupada repeated. Ishan's wife, Bibhavati, asked, what is the meaning of spiritual master? Actually, I am not your spiritual master, Prabhupada replied. That title is simply a formality. You should think of me as your spiritual father, your eternal father. So at the time of second initiation, at the time of rebirth, when we take our spiritual birth, when the spiritual master accepts us, the spiritual master is our eternal spiritual father, as Prabhupada says here, and the Shastras become our mother. And Prabhupada explains that if you want to, the only person who can tell you who your father is your mother. No one else knows except for your mother. So we can understand Krishna by going to our mother, the Shastras. So this is Ishan and Prabhavati, and you'll see in Ishan's lap he has a trumpet. He was famous for playing his trumpets during the kirtans. And they also had a very tiny baby who Prabhupada was very affectionate with. There he is on Ishan's back, and here she's holding the baby as Prabhupada comes off of his Vyasasana. As they walked past a tractor, Kulashekar remarked, the tractor is a very wonderful invention, isn't it? Prabhupada turned to Kulashekar. This tractor is the downfall of the Indian village system. Why is that? It does the work of 10 men. Yes, Prabhupada said. Previously, the young men of the village would be engaged in plowing the field. Then this tractor came along and did the work of all those young men, and they had nothing to do. So they went to the cities to try to find work, and they fell into illusion. So Prabhupada once explained to us in Mayapur, we were sitting in his room, and he explained that the British destroyed India through the train system. Now, we would all think that the train system is a very great thing, just like the tractor is a very great thing. But the British created the train system to exploit India, all the resources, because the trains would go into the villages that previously had no contact with the cities. And all of the rice, all of the resources from the villages would then be taken out of the villages and brought to the cities and then exported. And the same with the people. The people previously were on their land. 80% they were agriculturalists here in India. And when the trains came, well, the trains they would know now that they could go into the city and they could work in the factories and make a lot of money that way. And when they worked in the factories, Well, their life became degraded because factory life was so miserable. They started to take sharab, they started to drink, they started to eat meat, and in that way they completely lost their culture. So the tractor, in the same way, when it was brought into the villages, previously they used to use the bullocks, that's all. And every man had his bullock, he would be part of the family, they would live right in the house, take care of them just like family members. But when the tractor came, then they didn't need the bullocks anymore. So what did they do with the bullocks? They sent them to the slaughterhouses. We know that. And not only that, the men didn't have any work anymore. So then they went into the cities and they worked in factories. So it destroyed the entire culture that way, through the railways and through the tractors as well. Stopping beside a clump of yellowed grass, Prabhupada asked, "Why is this yellow grass different?" No one answered. "The other grass is green," he said, "but this is yellow. What is the reason?" Still no one answered. "This yellow grass is drying up," Prabhupada explained, "because the roots are not attached. Therefore it is yellow. Similarly, when we detach ourselves from Krishna, then we will dry up." They walked to a spot where the grass grew almost 6 feet high. Stopping at a path the tractor had cut, Prabhupada smiled. "Oh, we can go through there?" And he strode ahead with his cane into the head-high jungle of grass and weeds. He walked until he came to a low hill that had been cleared, and he stopped. As he stood there, surrounded by the sea of grass and a few disciples, Kulashekar asked about the song Prabhupada had been singing earlier that morning. So Prabhupada had his very sparse but nice quarters, and upstairs he had his room, downstairs the servant lived. So in the mornings, before he went for his walks, Prabhupada would have a Mangalartik for his little Radha Krishna deities that he had in his room. And he would sing bhajans at that time. So he sang a song that day that his servant had never heard. The song, Prabhupada said, is about Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He would rise and he will go out at this time of morning when the sun has risen but is not yet in the sky. Udila Aruna, we know that song. As Prabhupada spoke, the mist was already dissipating, and the golden glow in the sky had moved higher above the horizon. Prabhupada raised his hands and swayed from side to side. In this way, he said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would dance in the mornings. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would take out his Sankirtan party in the early mornings like this, and he would have different teams. For instance, Nityananda Prabhu and Haridas Thakur, they were one team that go out. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would also go out. As they returned by the main house, John Lennon stood gazing out through the glass doors, watching. Prabhupada, walking with a cane, dressed in his black coat and his Wellingtons. The Wellingtons are the boots. They're rubber boots because you have to walk through this high grass. Looked like the gentleman of the estate out for his morning walk. Stopping now and then, he would look at certain trees, touching their bark, rubbing their leaves, inspecting them closely. At the beginning of the walk, a devotee had picked a rose and handed it to him, and he still held it in his hand with care. He had walked for an hour. Everywhere the scenery had been beautiful, and everywhere he had instructed his followers in Krishna consciousness. So these pictures, most of them were taken by Guru Das because Guru Das was a photographer. That's why you'll find so many pictures of Jamuna in because Jamuna and Gurudas were husband and wife. So he would take these beautiful pictures of Prabhupada. And we have a collection of over 19,000 pictures of Prabhupada. So trying to find these pictures, it takes all week. But beautiful pictures trying to describe exactly what's being described in the Lilamrita. We have some pictures. We don't have the picture of Prabhupada holding the rose, unfortunately, but we do have the picture of Prabhupada feeling the leaves. As Prabhupada approached the building where he lived, he met little Saraswati. Taking her hand, he walked along with her to the foot of the stairs, where they stopped. Prabhupada was halfway up the stairs when he turned and saw Saraswati standing in the doorway watching. He beckoned and called to her, "Come on," and she crawled up the stairs after him. When Saraswati came into Prabhupada's room, he asked her, "So are you old enough to go to Gurukula?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Come here. I'm going to put a stamp on your forehead, and then we're going to put you in a red mailbox and send you to Gurukula." Saraswati began to cry, "Malati, Malati, I don't want to go," and ran and hid behind her mother. So there's a funny kind of humor. Prabhupada showed it here. Actually, he was scaring the child. When I was with Pishima once, there was a little child here. It was Vishalini and Vishal's little daughter, first daughter. Maybe she was the same age as Saraswati. So she took the baby's doll and she started to pat the baby very nicely, very lovingly, and then a little harder, and then a little harder, and then she started to hit the doll. And the baby started to cry and grabbed the doll and ran away. So Prabhupada was teasing Saraswati like that also. "Come on, Saraswati," Prabhupada coaxed. "Come sit on my lap and I will give you some prasadam." She came and sat on Prabhupada's knee. "Now get me the stamps," Purushottam, he teased. "We're going to send her to Gurukula." Saraswati shrieked and ran to Malati. To Srila Prabhupada, Saraswati was a pure spirit soul, but because she was in a small child's body, he didn't teach her philosophy. He teased her, gave her prasadam, and treated her with the affection of a grandfather. But through her attachment to him, she would become attached to Krishna. She learned the four regulative principles that she doesn't do any of those. And she would preach to the people when they came here to India that who is Krishna? Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After breakfast, when the sun had warmed the air, Prabhupada opened his windows, sat down at his harmonium, and sang bhajans. As he sang with closed eyes, his head shaking, he played the harmonium, and Jamuna sat at the bottom of the stairs crying tears of appreciation. Prabhupada had been singing for a while when he stopped and called for Jamuna. "Do you enjoy my kirtan?" he asked. "Yes," she nodded, "very much." "The prayers of Narottam Das Thakur," he said. "This sound is above the material platform. It is directly from the spiritual platform, and there is no need of understanding the language. It is just like a thunder burst. Everyone can hear the sound of thunder. There's no misunderstanding. Similarly, these songs are above the material platform, and they crack like thunder within your heart. Why don't you come here every day during my chanting?" "That would be wonderful," Jamuna said. So the bhajans of Narottam Das Thakur were so famous. There's a whole a lot, and much of it is being recorded. I must admit that the tapes of songs and prayers he's making now are the best ones I have ever heard. Wait until you hear them when we get back. As the Bhagavatam says, drink deep this nectar, O man of piety, and you shall be taken from this mortal frame. So Prabhupada's secretaries and his servants, it was part of their responsibility to share Prabhupada's activities with the other devotees by sending letters. So Prabhupada would also write letters, and his servants and secretaries would also write letters to keep the devotees informed of Prabhupada's activities. The women cooking for Prabhupada were serving him American desserts, apple pie, donuts, glazed cookies. Prabhupada would smile, but he would only nibble at his dessert. One afternoon he said, "These sweets are very nice, but no one has made me sandesh." None of the devotees knew how to make Bengali sweets, so Prabhupada took them into the kitchen and taught them to make sandesh. Although they had watched carefully, their first attempts produced sandesh that was dry and grainy. But Prabhupada accepted it, preferring the sandesh which Krishna himself used to eat to the Western confections. So Srila Prabhupada would take sandesh 3 times a day. He would have sandesh in the morning. We would get, I would make the sweets for their lordships, and we would save all of the Mangalarti sweets, bring them for Prabhupada's breakfast. Then we would make sandesh for Prabhupada's lunch, and then we would make sandesh for Prabhupada's nighttime meal. And that sandesh we would keep in a special katori and put it by his desk so that while he was translating at night, he could also have sandesh. There was no question about what was Prabhupada's favorite sweet. And we make all different kinds of sandesh. Sometimes so many different types, with saffron, with nuts, with layers, learning always from the Bengali sweet shops, all the different types of sandesh. So one time Prabhupada was in Delhi, and I won't mention her name, but a Western disciple was cooking for Prabhupada. And she hadn't learned how to make Bengali dishes and things like that. So she was cooking to the best of her capacity what she knew how to cook. And when the plate was brought in, Prabhupada said in Hindi, I'll just give the translation, that she's cooking according to her taste. So when you cooked for Prabhupada, you had to cook according to what Prabhupada liked to eat. And that means you had to learn. You had to learn what Prabhupada liked. So it would be a whole sampradaya, like a parampara. You didn't just go in and cook what you liked. You had to learn from his previous cooks, his previous servants, what Prabhupada liked to eat, and cook like that for Prabhupada. And sometimes, if you were very, very fortunate, Prabhupada himself would come into the kitchen and teach you the way he liked things to be cooked. Excellent. For the devotees at Tittenhurst, to have Prabhupada living among them was again to witness Krishna's pure devotee as he engaged constantly in ecstatic devotional service with his body, mind, and words. They could see how Prabhupada was speaking and acting in Krishna consciousness at every moment, and his presence confirmed that the most exalted platform of pure devotional service was a reality. Now, you remember that When Prabhupada lived at 26 Second Avenue, the devotees had the opportunity to be with Prabhupada in his apartment. And then when Prabhupada lived at San Francisco, they had an apartment for Prabhupada. They got to watch Prabhupada how he lived. But here in Tittenhurst, it was a very special arrangement because they were in the countryside and they had Prabhupada all to themselves, all the 18 devotees who were there. And they got to watch Prabhupada and be with Prabhupada all throughout the day and night. It was a very great experience for them because they got to see directly how Krishna consciousness was a reality in one's life, how you can be Krishna conscious 24 hours a day. His disciples felt bliss and renewed determination just being with him. Prabhupada's hosts, John and Yoko, also had the valuable opportunity to be near Prabhupada, although they chose to keep apart. Remaining together in their own world, they mingled but rarely with the devotees. Prabhupada's men continued to work under John's managers, and John was content to let the Swami and his entourage stay. It was a symbiotic relationship. The devotees needed a place to stay, and John needed workers. So they worked and they stayed. He gave them room and board. When the head gardener asked John how to treat the devotees, he said, "Let them please themselves." On hearing of certain activities in the main house, Prabhupada commented about the bad influence women sometimes have on men, but he kept out of John and Yoko's affairs. He had his own affairs in Krishna consciousness. So this is from By His Example again by Guru Das. We've all seen the book Chant and Be Happy. We sell it here. It has a different cover. It has a cover of chanting japa. But this was the original cover. The famous conversation between John Lennon, Yoko Ono, George Harrison, and Srila Prabhupada, which is transcribed in the booklet Chant and Be Happy, The Power of Mantra Meditation, occurred in the small front room of the servant's cottage at Tittenhurst Park. Mukunda, Shamsundar, and I all crowded in. That's Guru Das writing. As always, Prabhupada was gracious and could make everyone feel so welcome and special. Yoko Ono, she asks, if all mantras are just the name of God, then whether it's a secret mantra or an open mantra, it's all the name of God. So it doesn't really matter much, make much difference, does it? Which one you sing? So the reason that she asked this was because previously they had been taking guidance from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he gives secret mantras to each of his disciples. After they had gotten their secret mantras, they had gone to Rishikesh, and George had brought quite a few of his friends, not just the Beatles. You're not supposed to tell the secret mantra to anyone, but they were all close friends. So they secretly told each other what their mantras were, and they found out that they had all received the same mantra. And not only that, one of the actresses who had come had been receiving sexual advances from the guru. And after that happened, they all left Rishikesh and rejected the guru. So, this was Yoko's question. Srila Prabhupada answers, it does make a difference. For instance, in a drug shop, they sell all types of medicines for curing different diseases. But you still have to get a doctor's prescription in order to get a particular type of medicine. Otherwise, the druggist won't supply you. You might go to the drug shop and say, I'm diseased. Please give me any medicine you have. But the druggist will ask you, where is your prescription? Now, I included this because it explains a little bit more about why John and Yoko stayed separate from Srila Prabhupada, although they had such an opportunity to make spiritual advancement while he was there. So this is more from the book By His Example by Guru Das. Here we have John Lennon and Yoko Ono being arrested by the police for having drugs, intoxicants, illegal intoxicants. Something remarkable about this meeting is Prabhupada's reference to druggists and prescriptions as an analogy for receiving the right mantra from the right source. At the time, John and Yoko were having their own battles with addictions, so Prabhupada's reference was especially relevant and potent. Prabhupada gave an example of being addicted to Krishna. I never heard Prabhupada use that analogy before. Prabhupada's point was that we can love Krishna similar to the way addicts love their substances. The addict feels separation from, is always longing for, waiting, and thinking about gratification. But the difference is, while material relief is temporary, spiritual addiction is eternal bliss. Prabhupada offered an eternal solution to one's corporeal problems, love of Krishna or God. Corporeal means bodily problems. John asked how to recognize the right spiritual master. Prabhupada said that finding the right guru is very special and that the guru should be tested just like the disciple. So we have time for one more. Having been whisked away from the airport to Tittenhurst, Prabhupada had seen little of London, and one day he asked Shamsundar to take him on a tour of the city. Prabhupada had grown up in British Calcutta, hearing London praised as the seat of Britain's world empire. So when he saw how small many of London's historic landmarks were, he was particularly surprised. At Buckingham Palace, he remarked, "We have many houses in Calcutta bigger than this." The Thames, that's the famous river in London, celebrated in the writings of British authors he had studied in college, was a disappointment also. "It's a canal," he said. "It's only a canal. In my mind, I thought it was bigger than the Ganges." All right, so now we're finished. And next week, His Grace Radhacharan will continue with this. Okay? Hare Krishna. All glories to Prabhupada. Oh, thank you.
I must say that your pronunciation is excellent.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna,